despite all that, right, and I'm going much longer than I intended, but I love talking about that stuff, though, we really shot ourselves in the foot, right? We blew it. We cut taxes big time and kept spending at levels that Californians demanded. Now, I don't have any problem with that. I'm kind of what you might call a liberal. I don't think government's bad. I think government does good for people and public programs and services are needed. But you have to be willing to pony up the money for it. You can't have the services on the one hand and the costs and then say we're going to cut taxes on the other hand because here go your costs and there go your revenues. And if they're not meeting, you've got year after year of deficits that you're papering over. And that's what we did between 2000 and 2008. Well, what happens in 2005? Boom! The housing boom goes bust. I love this slide. This is median home prices in California going back to 1989, 20 years ago. You can see for a long time, this isn't adjusted for inflation, but it's relatively flat. The median price of a home in California. Then around 1999, it starts creeping up. That's around the middle of the chart. And all of a sudden, the median home price in California shoots up by about 200% over a 5-year period. Now, you know, a median price this is the 484,000 at the top refers to May of 2007. That's a statewide median. That doesn't mean a lot down here where home prices are a lot higher. That's just the middle of homes sold in California in that particular month. But that's a 200% increase in home prices over a 5-year period. Well, what eventually happens to every boom that's ever been known to economic historians? It blows up. The assumption behind this was that home prices would always go up, which was why you could get people, many times fraudulently, into loans that they ultimately couldn't afford when their teaser rate expired, and all of a sudden their mortgage payment went from $600 to $1,800 a month. And that's why we have hundreds of thousands of foreclosures in California every year with seemingly no end in sight. You can see on the downside, home prices have dropped by more than half. Just 2 months ago, the median home price looks like we've troughed out here at $221,000, and you can see it's ticking up a little bit in May and June. That's the very end of the line on that chart. So maybe we've reached the bottom of the housing market, but look how far we fall. And look at essentially where we would have been if we didn't have any of this unsustainable rise in home prices in the first place. So what do you get when you get a housing boom? Initially, you get a lot of job losses. Once you get the bust, you get job losses in construction, in the financial sector. A lot of real estate agents lose their jobs. Home building goes down the drain. But eventually, it spreads to the rest of the economy. It's a contagion that we couldn't contain it within the housing sector. And what this chart shows is year-over-year job losses in California. By the end of the chart, it shows that from June 2008 to June 2009, the California economy lost over 760,000 jobs. Okay, we were doing pretty well before the housing bust, or the housing boom exploded. But once it explodes, and it looked like the financial sector was coming down last fall. Although it looks like we narrowly averted that, you end up with a situation where hundreds of thousands of Californians have lost their jobs. I'm going to skip this slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It just shows that all the gains we made in the boom are gone. All the jobs we gained between 2003 and 2007 have now disappeared in 2 years. This slide shows California's unemployment rate. We're the top line there. We're at 11.6%. Many economists think we're going higher. And we're not going to really see an economic recovery until probably 2011. But essentially, we've gone from 3 years ago, a 5% unemployment rate, more than doubling. That's just people officially unemployed. That doesn't count all the people working part-time who really want to work full-time, all the people who are discouraged and not counted anymore as being unemployed even though they want a job. Once you count those folks in, you're up to closer to 17 or 18% underemployment rate. So that's where we're at in California. What does it mean for public programs? It means a lot of public programs are seeing increases because when people start to lose their jobs, they lose their health insurance generally. A lot of people become eligible for Medi-Cal. This chart, the bottom part of the chart, I broke out Los Angeles. I hadn't really done this before, just looking at LA, and I'm sure someone in the room can explain why Medi-Cal enrollment in Los Angeles County over this 3-year period was essentially flat. And all of the growth in Medi-Cal occurred in the rest of California. We've seen 360,000 additional Medi-Cal enrollees over the last couple of years, but none of that growth occurred in Los Angeles County. This shows you the year-over-year change by by month. Los Angeles County, the dark bars. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I don't want to get bogged down on this. I just wanted to give you some perspective. But we have seen Medi-Cal enrollment in the rest of California going up pretty substantially, monthly gains of now 5%. Healthy families, this next chart looks at the Healthy Families Program. We've seen a continuous rise in enrollment. Again, there's LA, the bottom half of those charts. LA County makes up about a quarter of Healthy Families enrollment. Enrollment's been going up pretty steadily. This chart shows you the year-over-year change from one month to the next and the next year. Generally, the pace of growth in Los Angeles County is slower than in the rest of the state. There's that weird peak there at the end of 2007. That has to do with the governor making an executive order saying we're not going to kick anyone off of Healthy Families who would otherwise be disenrolled because of all the wildfires in Southern California. So that kept enrollment artificially high for a couple of months at the end of 2007, and those kids were disenrolled as they otherwise would have been. The big thing I want to get to here, in addition to the program side, is the revenue side. Let's look at revenues. In 2007-08, this is the fiscal year that just ended last year, right, on June 30th. The state had an actual general fund revenues and transfers of about $102 billion, right? That's the top there. $102 billion. Everybody was thinking, wow, we passed $100 billion in general fund revenues. We're a $100 billion state now in terms of the kinds of programs and services we can support. Well, at the time they passed the 2008 budget, which was last September 30th, they anticipated $102 billion coming in. Not too bad, a little bit less, certainly not growing from 2007-08, a little bit less than we got in the prior fiscal year, but enough to support programs and services with just a few nips and tucks. Instead, look what happens. As of June of this year, in the Comptroller's report, the Comptroller indicates that the state received about $87 billion general fund. $87 billion, that's actual, whereas they thought they were forecasting $102 billion. The bottom line there is revenues and transfers out of the general fund were about $15 billion for 2008, below what they were anticipating when they wrote the Budget Act, when they passed the budget last September. That is a huge and unprecedented drop in revenues. 2009-10 is very similar. At the time they passed, back in December, this is just December, this is 8 months ago, the Department of Finance was saying, we're probably going to get about $102 billion in 2009-10, the year that we're in right now. This is back in December, only 8 months ago. They were projecting revenues of $102 billion. As of May, the governor's Department of Finance said, we're really only going to get about $89 billion, 88.8. Now in July, we learned revenues are about $3.5 billion below that. So we're actually, this chart's a little dated now, it's actually closer to $85 billion expected general fund revenue. So we're trying to run public services in California that would actually cost, on a workload basis, well over $100 billion in a single year on $85 billion in revenues. So that is why our legislators have been struggling for months now, for well over a year and a half, as the revenue situation has continued to deteriorate beyond what anyone ever expected to occur. Basically, we're $30 to $40 billion in the hole over a two-year period, and they had to figure out, how do we close that gap? What do we do? And they had to do it with a requirement that they had to get 2/3 of the members of each chamber of the legislature to agree on the solutions, and they had to persuade the governor to go along with it